Hopefully we all had a nice piece of cake and maybe some cup of coffee. And we should go on, and I'm welcoming here Freya van der Boom, legal researcher for ICRI CIR. You have to explain what these means to me later on. And you are talking about legal barriers to access and reuse, like a copyright law, etc.? Okay. I'm turning on your microphone. And,
yes, hello.
You're free to go.
Okay, thank you.
Please welcome, warm applause.
Right, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I'm not sure if okay, well, if you can't hear me in the back, just raise your hand. So nobody's raising their hand, so you can hear me, good. Okay, so my name is Freya van den Boom. I work at a research institution in Belgium, in Leuven, and we do research on law and ICT. Here you see some projects I am involved with. One of the projects is Open Science Link, and Open Science Link is a European project which aims to open up access basically to scientific research data. It's going to, what we are developing at the moment is a platform where researchers can deposit their data, and this data can then be linked to their publications. So we are talking about access, we're talking about open data, and one of the things we need, of course, is also access to the data underlying research. So that's one of the projects. Within Open Science Link, we are currently running pilots on open access publishing. We have a biomedical data journal, which will help link publications with the underlying data sets. And so the idea is to make not only the results of research open, but also the underlying data. So today I wanted to talk about the legal aspects of public sector information, which is LAPSI. LAPSI was concluded last year in November. We had our big presentation. On our website, I really urge you to visit the website. You can find all of our publications, all of our policy papers. We've done research on licensing, so we also have licensing guidelines, best practices in intellectual property rights in general, also good practices on institutional competition law and issues. And we have position papers on a collection of access to data. That's basically what I want to go into today. Some of the LAPSI partners you've already heard speak today. This morning we had George Hitmar, and this afternoon we had Bastiaan van Loenen, who also participated in our research. Yes, so the Public Sector Information Directive, you've already heard something about that. The aim is to exploit the full potential of reusing data produced by or for the public sector. Open public sector data involves making machine-readable data sets available for any reuse without restrictions or licensing fees. So that's the purpose of the directive. It sets out a general framework for the conditions governing the right to reuse information resources held by public sector bodies. So it also includes provisions on non-discrimination and transparent licensing. Again, we did extensive research on licensing, so if you're interested in that, please do visit the website. The Public Sector Information Directive is the main EU legal instrument for stimulating the creation of value-added information products and services. We already saw some examples of some tools and some apps that are based on public sector information or data as a source. So the objective of the PSI directive is to achieve, through minimum harmonization of national rules and practices, a more level playing field, which will allow European companies, that goes too quick, to exploit the full potential of all of this data that is in public sector bodies. So in a nutshell, what does the PSI directive do? Commercial and non-commercial use should be made possible. Of course, there's a problem. There's third-party intellectual property rights. If those are in the data, then you can't. Then they fall outside of the scope of the directive. Intellectual property rights, you have to think about copyrights, of course, in the works. And also, we have the sui generis database right. So one of the issues is, which is still not harmonized in all of the member states, is what exactly falls under copyright. The works made by public bodies, do they fall under copyright? And then who owns the copyright? That's a big issue still. The PSI directive requires that documents held by public sector bodies are made available. So only in the case that there are intellectual property rights, they do not have to be available. The PSI directive also requires that permission to reuse is granted through non-discriminatory and transparent terms, which relates to fees, which you also heard about this morning, the issues with that. I'm trying to find, yes. Any fees must be cost-based and pre-established. So the default principle basically is that reuse is allowed against at most the cost of dissemination. The accompanying guidelines on licensing that we also have developed favor the use of open and liberal licenses. So of course, if you do feel, if a public sector body does need to put some restrictions on the use, then it should at least consider to make them as liberal as possible. Sorry. Okay, so the focus is on reuse, and that's an important issue, that the directive itself does not require access to information. It doesn't oblige member states to provide access, which is of course the basic thing we need before we can reuse information. The PSI directive applies to documents that are already publicly accessible under national rules for access to documents. So it doesn't oblige member states to allow reuse. Which is why the focus of the analysis of the research we did, which I wanted to talk about today. I'm sorry, this is a computer I'm not really used to. Sorry, I lost my mouse, I'm sorry. Okay, anyway. The focus of the analysis on good practices on access. It was on access to official information laws at member state level. So we looked at the Freedom of Information Act as a tool maybe to allow access to this information that we want. Recommendations in our document are reuse as a standard concerning e-government programs, promote reuse-friendly access rights, develop deeper understanding of the impact of sector-specific national laws, and develop and adopt forward-looking data protection safeguards. We've already been hearing a lot about data protection, and I'll get back to that as well. So our good practices survey, we took the perspective of the reuser. What does the reuser need? The freedom of information laws in the different member states were assessed along 3 dimensions. Their contribution to making PSI discoverable, because of course reusers will need to know what kind of information or data public sector bodies have, and what the characteristics are of this data to reuse. Secondly, we looked at making PSI available, so the inclusiveness of different information types were looked at, and institutions as well, and the conditions they hold for access. And finally, ensuring data is usable. So the contribution of Freedom of Information Acts to ensure that data is usable, so providing norms that address the format, machine readability, timelines, completeness, accuracy, and deliverable modes. So the key findings of the survey were ensure the widest possible access to resources, limit the restrictions to what can be done with the information. These are central aspects of Freedom of Information Acts. Thirdly, also provide legal certainty on what use can be made. That's again a key point for licenses and public domain notices. These are key instruments to make this possible. Respect user preferences with respect to the format of supply. We've seen that not every member state has the same way of providing the users when they request information in what format they want it. help to reduce search costs, and give reusers a voice in decision making. Point 5 through 6 are aspects of discoverability and usability, and we've seen that these are not particularly strong in the laws that we have analyzed. And we also see that the Freedom of Information Acts are primarily focusing on transparency of the government, so they are not really very usable tools for helping us get access to information. So this table, I'm not sure if it's really visible, but you can find it in the report we have. It summarizes the characteristics in the Freedom of Information Act that play a role in stimulating reuse. Many laws have some provisions that affect usability, but most of them are mostly focusing on data provided as is. So at most, a party seeking access can have some choice between available formats, but it's not really that machine readable most of the time. So compared to the PSI, because the PSI does encourage public sector bodies to make documents available in machine-readable formats with metadata and using open standards, we see that Freedom of Information Acts do not really help as much as we need to get access. So our third recommendation was to develop deeper understanding of the impact of sector-specific national laws, because the question, of course, remained, what other instruments do we have? We need to know what kind of status the data has, and to see if it is publicly accessible. For that, we looked at discoverability and usability. A point of future research we still need to do is to see what other legal instruments there are and what other legal instruments we can use. High-value data sets, this is a question I've been hearing a lot, is okay, so people want data, but what kind of data should we open up first? Well, reuse friendliness for access to public information resources of laws and regulations. That's of course important with these kind of high-value data sets. There has been research done. The European Commission has given guidelines on what kind of high-value data sets should be made available. This list includes company data, statistics, mapping, postcodes, and transport data, such as timetables. These should be released for reuse. Also, they should be open by default. So if member states want to know what kind of data sets they should reuse, they can look this up also in a recent study which has been done, which came up with 250 data sets that should be open for reuse. Then we have the Inspire Directive. We chose that as one of our case studies. The Inspire Directive developed an infrastructure for spatial information. And what they did is they made a geo-portal where all of this information was available. So all of the parties who joined the Inspire Directive, they made that data available, and this is like a good case example for what other types of data could be made available as well, and what the ways in which to do that. And then finally, we come to the data protection. Engage in data protection by design and default, and perform data protection impact assessments. That is, of course, necessary to discoverability and usability. But of course, disclosure of personal information is still one of the big issues at the moment. A lot of the public sector bodies also hold information that holds personal data. So how to deal with that? Should this data be open or not? I think that the previous speakers have done a really good job into giving the problems which is related to open up this kind of data. I just want to mention that the PSI directive itself does recognize that data protection must be respected, and this is also made explicit in many of the implementing laws in the member states. What is important to consider is, on the one hand, of course, we have data protection laws, but should they have primacy over the right to reuse of public sector info or not? So that is a question which is still pretty much debatable. We've seen that in the discussion on personal data and privacy as well. So the trend is to frame reuse also as open data. As an open data policy, this is quite complicated, unfortunately, because on the one hand, you have the mission to provide access to all with no conditions attached, which makes it difficult for public sector bodies, of course, to comply then to data protection rules, which tells them not to open up everything without conditions attached. So I am done. If you want more information on LabC project, please do visit the website. All of the data is available there. For more information on Open Science Link, we are also looking for people who are interested in participating in the pilot. So if you are interested, please also visit that website. And if you want to know more about the research that we do, you can always contact me. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, please, for Freya? Yes, good.
You have mentioned several times licenses and recommendations. Mm-hmm. Does LabC aim some certain licenses like
Creative Commons?
Sorry?
Do you mean Creative Commons?
Yes, or it's just leave in general?
No, we have an extensive report done and where we compared all of the different open access licenses available. So we did look at the Creative Commons licenses, but we also looked at we also see that governments every now and then develop their own licenses. But what we advise and what also the European Commission advises in this respect is not to develop your own license. Use one which is already out there, because that of course helps with the interoperability. So Creative Commons, especially the new version, number 4, we do advise that that one is being used. Also because that one includes the data, the sui generis database right protection, which the previous versions did not. And that's of course is really important. So this helps with making data sets open and telling people what kind of reuse they can make of data. So yes, in the report you can definitely see the recommendations we've made and based on our research.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Another question, please, from the audience? Right. Okay, we still have a couple of minutes, and I will probably ask mine as well. Pardon me, right, but one of the slides you had compared the reuse of the open data, and I was under the impression that data of public domain and data in open data, and they are not the same, right? And we have the definition for the public data, and the question was asked absolutely precisely about the Creative Commons, etc. Are we trying to squeeze some legislative maneuvers into open data terminology, etc., since we already have what we are pulling towards, which is a data of a public domain, Creative Commons, etc. So are we pulling open data to that direction, or we just still trying to shape it?
I'm not really sure if I understand your question. Are we pulling open data into the public domain?
Open data definition towards the public domain definition.
Yes, I think you can. Yeah, you definitely see. Maybe I should explain first what the public domain is. The public domain is when works are not protected by intellectual property rights. So that is either because they are facts and cannot be protected by intellectual property rights, such as patents or such as design rights or copyright. So these fall into the public domain, and anybody can use them freely, and you don't have to ask permission. You can do with them what you want. Also is if copyright has lapsed. So copyright mostly exists for 70 years after the death of the maker. If that period has ended, then works also fall in the copyright. So it's not that somebody has invented something or somebody has created something that they have the rights to refuse you to use that work forever. No, they fall into the public domain. So when you talk about open data, we want people to use it, and we kind of want them to use it without having to ask permission for anybody. From anybody, and we also want them to use it for commercial use, but also for non-commercial use. So these licenses make that possible because, of course, the moment you create something and it fulfills the criteria for copyright protection, then you have copyright protection. So that means that you have the right to tell somebody they cannot use your work. But of course, under reuse, that would be a barrier, because if you wanted to use a lot of information, you would have to ask every owner to get permission to use that. So with licenses like Creative Commons, it's really easy to see, okay, this author of this work has put a Creative Commons license on it, so he immediately tells me what I can and cannot do with the work. And with open data, that's really valuable, because we kind of want everything to go, to not be restricted in any way. So you could compare it with the public domain, where you are allowed to use works without restriction.
So in this case, open data is more like a concept, like a process of opening some data or pulling it towards 1/3 or the second or the fifth type of the copyright law, for example, towards public domain data or maybe level 2 information, level 3 information, whatever, because open data is not like a legislative type of the information properly secured or unsecured, etc. It's more like a concept, a process. You should open your data. Okay, yeah. To what extent, etc., etc. So to the public domain extent, yes and no. Okay, what kind of information goes under this and what kind of information can never go under this? Right. But should we work on the definition of the concept itself in the legislative form?
Well, the public domain is probably more of a legal term. Yeah. So you have to be, I think, a bit careful with combining these terms or using these terms interseparable. How do you say that? With confusing these terms. So open data works that, no, how do I say that? Let me see. Data which is open data can be in the public domain, but it can also not be in the public domain. And the whole discussion is, how do we get works that are not in the public domain, how can we also use them the same way we are allowed to use works in the public domain? But of course, the moment you separate or you go over the barrier between public domain and non-public domain, you get into all of these legal barriers and legal problems. And then you have to ask permission. And we want open data to be both and use both of the works.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was a good one. Thank you very much. Right. Okay, a big applause. Craig van der Boom. Okay. You mentioned websites, etc., so go check it out afterwards. Now I would like to welcome Dr. Abbey Basha. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. Okay, good one. Okay, please find your presentation, pull it up.
Let's find the mouse first, as usual thing. There you go. There you go. There you go. And there you go. And there you go.
Yes.
Good. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. So, some good news. We're finishing soon. So, if you're doing your emails, probably it's time to wrap up. My name is Roush. Not to bore you with my details, I'm a full-time academic and a part-time human being. In this short presentation, I'll tell you a little bit about the Open Data Maturity Model. This thing has just been introduced by the Open Data Institute in the UK. Talking about open data, first I have to start by talking about the importance of open data, some success stories to elicit the need. Then we'll talk a little bit about the challenges faced by organizations trying to embark on open data, and then I'll talk you through the Open Data Maturity Model. Success stories. I'm sure you probably, how many of you heard about the NHS story from the UK? Anyone heard about this open data success story? It's quite popular, actually. There you go. So what happened in the UK, the NHS, this is the National Health Service, decided to publish all the data about the mortality rate of heart surgeries. Okay, everybody went mad at that stage. But what happened afterwards, patients were able to compare surgeons based on their success rates, hospitals competed, and then survival rates improved by 50% within a very short period of time, actually. So that was a very interesting case study. Another one, which I heard about it yesterday in the conference, the Open Europe Conference, about Latvia, decided to open its legislature. Now people can submit petitions online, and if you get enough support, as well, all web-based, your petition goes to the parliament, and which would vote on your proposals. So basically, that's what we call people-driven policy, which I think is a very interesting story. Here is the third one. How many of you watched the Gangnam Style? Only 5. Okay, if I think the last time I checked, there are 3 billion internet users, and the world population is 7 billion. So basically, half of us have watched it. How many of you watched Gangnam Style? That's more like it, yeah. So why am I talking about Gangnam Style? What does it have to do with big data? So in my other life, I work in energy efficiency. So I'm just giving you an example of what we can do with open data if we have access to open data. So that's, by the way, I need to give credit for my colleague John Summers at Leeds University who gave us the idea. So this is a print screen from YouTube that shows 1.6 billion views within 1 year of that single video. Yeah. Let's do some. That's published data from YouTube or Google. Another published data is the amount of energy required to stream 1 minute of video from a server to outside a YouTube data center, which is roughly around 0.2 watts. Another piece of data tells you the amount of energy you need to download 1 megabyte over the internet. Another piece of published data tells you as well the average internet device consumption to watch 1 minute of video. With all that data available, doing basic calculations on this one video, which was downloaded 1.6 billion times, I think that was 1 year only, 17 megabyte, 4 minutes. Basic calculations tells us this one video consumed, not to produce, just to watch, over 1 year around 312 gigawatt hours. Yeah, I'm sure you're not electrical engineers. 312 gigawatt hours is basically like consuming 100 million liters of diesel. It's like 80,000 years of cars. It's like having a 36 megawatt hour of engine generator running for 1 year. But if you can identify with these numbers, again using open data, this is the equivalent of the annual consumption of energy of the country Burundi over 1 year. Yeah. So there's interesting stuff we can do in research when we have access to all that data. Now that's the message I'm trying to get here. So, so open data is great. We can do, it's helping the public health, it's helping democracy, it's helping researchers, but it comes with a price. Okay, there are a lot of challenges around open data, and we heard a lot of discussions around legal stuff and all. But there are other resources, for example, other challenges like limited access to resources. We know open data competes for staff time with other programs, with other initiatives. Okay, you need time to prepare the data, identify the data, make the data available online. Value proposition. This is a very popular question. Why should I make my data open? Why should I invest in this? So you need to see the return on investment on this. Technical know-how. How do I do it? What sort of standards do I need to know? How do I understand the regulations around it, the licenses, etc. And business process adaptation, operational impact, and so on and so forth. As probably whoever embarked on open data knows, open data is more of a journey than anything else. And to succeed in that journey, you really need to be able to do it efficiently. You need to be able to prioritize your activities. And most importantly, you need to be able to benchmark how good you are doing it compared to others, okay? And that's exactly why recently we started to see work around this maturity modeling of open data, okay? I think the first one appeared in 2010 was a Gartner one. Shortly after, we've seen a few in the research community. Most recently, I think the CMMI Institute introduced one about data management. But this one that I'm talking about today was introduced by the ODI, has just been released 2 weeks ago, actually, in a draft form, and the final version is due in a few weeks' time. What's unique about this maturity model is that it builds on existing work, like the capability maturity model. How many of you know what CMM is? CMMI? Capability maturity? Yeah, it's basically a technique that helps you assess the maturity of an organization. And it also builds on balanced scorecards, if you know what these are. It's a management technique. So if you already use these techniques, it'll be easy to integrate this work within the organization. Another advantage about this one, I'll tell you what it is in a moment. Another advantage is that it highlights the beneficial effects of open data. It tells you examples of some of the benefits you could get from adopting open data. And last but not least, it measures maturity across multiple dimensions. It allows you to measure maturity as a user or as a data source. So, what is the open data maturity model? First, it's based on CMM. So if you know CMM, it's based on a scale of 5. 1 being initial, 5 being optimizing. So initial, basically, you don't do open data or you do it ad hoc here and there. 2 being repeatable, that means more than one department does open data. Defined, this is where you start using standardized approaches. Managed, this is where open data becomes popular in the organization, and this is where you start monitoring the process, etc. And optimizing means that you've matured, you're trying to become more efficient at open data, etc. So this is the scale that this model uses to assess organizations. And it measures organization across 5 dimensions. I'll take you through the details of these dimensions shortly. If you're familiar with balanced scorecards, you probably you'll be familiar with some of these titles. So the first dimension is the data management processes. And this is about identifying what processes in your organization underpin data publishing. So we talk about data release processes, what framework do you use to publish data, what steps do you use to publish data, how frequent do you publish your data, is it timely, etc. Standards development and adoption, do you develop your own standards or do you use off-the-shelf, widely agreed upon standards? Do you put an effort to reduce the burden of creating and maintaining your own standards to increase adoption, etc.? Data governance, do you look at maintaining, auditing the data, ensuring quality, integrity, protection across the data lifecycle? And last but not least in this dimension is data diffusing. Do you conduct any risk assessment on your data before you release it? Do you understand the risk associated with releasing your data? And do you remove any personal data? We talked a lot about personal data today, or business sensitive data before you release your data. The second dimension is knowledge and skills, and this dimension measures the culture, the open data culture within an organization. And here, there are a couple of things we measure, do you have the right expertise? Do you have the people who understand the risks, the cost-benefit of open data? Those who can understand your strategy, the organization strategy and objectives, and can implement these in real life. And also understand the technical skills, the standards, etc. on open data. As well as, do you catalog or capture procedures used to produce the data and the way you process the data owners, etc. The third dimension is customer support and engagement, and this is basically to measure whether as an organization you know your users and sources, if applicable. So the first one is about engagement process. So do you have any process in place to identify your potential reusers, your communities of interest, stakeholders, etc. The second one is about documentation. Do you document the data before you publish it? Do you include any indicators, statistics, descriptions? so on and so forth. Third one is reuser support processes. Do you have any of this? Do you have like a discussion forum for your reusers? Do you have any channel for your reusers to be able to report errors? Do you notify your reusers of any significant change to your data set? And last but not least is the community norms. And what we look at here is it's viewed as a data reuser. Do you declare or attribute any data sets you use? Are you transparent about the data sets you use? Do you provide feedback to the data sources about the data sets you use to help them sustain it? Investment and financial performance, this is the fourth dimension, and this is about your awareness and appreciation of your and valuation of your data sets. So the first thing we look at, financial oversight. Do you factor in your budgeting for projects or operational costs, the cost for publishing open data? Do you know how to value your data sets? That's the disevaluation process. Clearly, if a highly valued data set should attract more investment, and by highly valued, we mean data sets that aligns more with your organizational objectives or KPIs. Last but not least is open data procurement. Do you consider open data in your procurement practices? For example, if you have subcontracting work, do you include any IP ownership around the data produced? Do you request in your tenders the providers to detail their big data delivery processes, and so on and so forth? And last but not least is the strategy dimension. And here we look at, like, do you embed open data practices in your products, in your reporting cycles? We look at, do you treat your data as an asset? Most organizations nowadays do. Do you capture details about these assets, like the amount of money you invested in making this data available, the risk associated with publishing this data, anything you captured from your target communities or etc. about this data set? So it's a catalog of information about each and every data set you plan to make open. So once you've done the exercise, this is a very brief matrix you could end up with, assessment matrix. So that matrix usually helps you to identify areas which you're good at and areas where you need to invest more time to develop. For the nice thing about this maturity model is that it also tells you the benefits of going from one level to the other. So if you're at level 3 with data management processes, then it'll tell you if you go to level 4, then you will benefit X, Y, and Z. So it not only helps you to focus your effort, but also helps you to understand the value of the initiative you're embarked on. More details about this work can be found on these links. The first one takes you to the assessment grid. That's the one I just showed you, something similar to that one, but much more detailed. And the second one takes you to the guidance document. These were just released, I think, a couple of weeks ago, literally 2 weeks ago. So they are in draft formats. It's highly recommended. If you're interested, you could go there and type in your feedback on this work. I think that the first draft is the first final draft is due to be published sometime in March. Thanks very much. Thanks for staying awake anyway. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Please raise your hands for the questions. Okay.
One at a time.
What can we do with them?
I understand them. Yeah, I was sitting there. So.
Okay. But nevertheless, I want to answer one question.
There you go. But my ears are blocked, so.
Yeah. You spoke firstly about the value proposition of the for the open data, and we of course understand that it generates money and it generates business and it can generate a whole lot of new businesses. Of course, it can disrupt some industries, etc. The YouTube example that you show us, it's actually a very funny state. I mean, it's just one video, and people generate daily, I don't know, billions of information bits using Twitter, using whatever the social networks, etc., etc. The amount of information we release daily is tremendous. And of course, some of the companies, especially if they are keen in sales, etc., if they don't get the grab on the real data, they start analyzing Twitter, etc., etc., to squeeze some information out of that. And now you can imagine some governmental institution or some policymaker trying to decide what kind of real valuable information we would disclose or open at first and then at second, etc., etc. And your slide showed something I wanted to ask from the very beginning. How do we evaluate the data set, the future value of such data set? So imagine you are talking to some policymaker or to some governmental institution who has two data sets and they can't decide which one to release first. Now, if we take just slowly, so we could all just grasp in it and understand, what would be your conversation with such institution?
Yeah. It really depends on who you're dealing with. So let's take the examples I talked about. So if you talk about the NHS, which is the National Health Service in the UK, how do you value data set first? So do you value it based on your organizational objectives and strategy? For the National Health Service, it's not about making money. It's about helping people, enhancing the quality of the care they provide, etc. So any data set that helps them achieve their objectives and strategy, then that's a very valuable data set for them. That's why the value question, the value proposition varies largely depending who you talk to. So for the NHS, that particular data set they had about the mortality rate of heart operations was a very valuable one because they knew if they can do something about this, then the potential is massive. And it worked. They cut down the mortality rate by 50%, which was a massive thing within the time frame. Okay. If you deal with the second example about it's not about generating money there. It's about providing better service to your citizens, engaging your citizens in the process, better democracy as well. So these are the objectives for that organization. So the data set that helps them achieve these objectives, then that's a very valuable data set. Yeah? And then if you deal with commercial organizations who want to make money, if you can show them how they can make money from their data sets, if they make it public, then as well, that would be the value, assuming that's the value for them, then you need to show them how they would be able to make money out of a data set. So it really depends on the context here. But the definition of the value, my definition of a value of a data set would be the higher the data set aligns with your organizational objectives and strategy, the more valuable it is for your organization. It's a trade-off thing. There's no it'll be difficult to put a number on these things. It's a trade-off thing. So you evaluate and prioritize. That's the word I used at the beginning. About efficiency, about prioritization of activities.
Yeah, the goals of the organization may be some public services.
Organizational goals
and
objectives.
It's not always about money. Now the business takes a look at it quite differently. It just sees the data set as a value, as a goal, as some information you have to turn quickly to generate some money, etc. And we've been talking a lot and reading a lot about people calculating the impact on the economy of the whole EU by just opening data, and billions of euros are mentioned, etc. So somebody has calculated it in some way.
Yeah, you have to ask them now.
This was maybe not a question, but
yeah, I agree with it. There's the direct impact, which we talk about, and there's the indirect impact, which is probably sometimes difficult to measure. But yes. So I don't think anyone predicted that if they release the number of the number of times people viewed a YouTube video, and if they release that data about energy, people can calculate that one YouTube video has consumed equal energy to a whole nation. So you could never predict what people can do with it, and that's the beauty of it. And that's why it's very difficult to put a number. I mean, another coincidence, another example is from the US. I was reading about this recently. So the US published...
Wait. Which example?
It's in the US, they published the record about offenders, child offenders, yeah? And someone took that data set and then took the data set about schools and mapped the two data sets and realized they were locating people where very, like in one case, above a school or something, where they shouldn't be. Yeah, so the value, again, the value of open data here was beyond any financial reward.
Right.
So you could never predict, and that's the beauty of it, what people can do with the data sets.
Okay. Thank you very much. A warm applause.
Thank you.
It was a good one. And since Ravi also mentioned name of the Latvia in one slide with the initiatives, etc., I now want to give a stage to probably the first one here to talk from the Latvia point of view, right? Okay. Toms Ceļmillers, Senior Consultant of Information Society Policy Division, Electronic Government Department, Ministry of Environmental Protection and Regional Development of the Republic of Latvia. I'm finished right now. Okay, can you find your presentation? Okay, it's not here. We should find it. Šitais nav. She's. Okay. Good. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, very long name of my job title, and also very exciting name of my presentation. And as we are the policy planners of the e-government, I will tell you briefly what we are doing, and also give some points about the opening of data from the experience of our colleagues here and abroad. First, probably the reason why a lot of you are here is that Latvia has the presidency of the European Council until June this year. And as all the presidencies, we also have a plan and program what we will do with our presidency time. And the digital issue is one of the priorities of Latvia's presidency. And under that digital issue, there are directions, and under these directions, one of them is public sector modernization. And under there, you can find that open data is also mentioned. In context of the presidency plans, you may also have heard of a phrase, digital by default, which means that every process and legislation has to be built for digital environment, or at least compatible with digital environment. And abstracting from the presidency, the discussions we now have on EU level, the open data is not the buzzword anymore. Now we talk about big data and data-driven economy. But to our view, and also from the conclusions that we had yesterday, open data is kind of a key to data-driven economy. And that is also recognized by Latvia. And our new e-government strategy, Information Society Development Guidelines, has set the open data principle as one of the four most important principles that we should do, and where should we invest in the next few years until 2020. How do we will measure the progress on the open data? We are using the PSI scoreboard indicators. As now we can see, Latvia is somewhere in the middle, but our goal would be to go close to the top 3 or even higher until 2020. And other indicator which is not actually used in the guidelines to measure our progress, but it's very interesting that we have appeared there thanks to Uldis Boyars and colleagues from Latvian University, is the Open Data Index, where the first results were that we are 51% open and number 34 in the last year. So we see that there is a room for improvement. And what are the activities to make these all policies into something real? Well, first of all, above those policies, there's the PSI Directive, which we have to transpose until July 2015, this year. So these amendments to our Freedom of Information law are now in a stage that hopefully that we are close to the approval of Cabinet of Ministers. We still have some reconciliations to do a little bit. But hopefully this goes to the Cabinet of Ministers in next few weeks. And also with the Information Society Development Guidelines, which is like a big document that covers all the areas, there is also one specific activity, which is the creation of conceptual architecture of public ICT, which also includes the basic principles that were put down in the guidelines before. It includes reuse and data exchange. And to make all these principles to work, we have to develop now the criteria for all the new state ICT projects to include the open data and exchange interfaces. Now, to touch upon one sensitive subject of funding, as I put at the top, is open data free for everyone? That is our goal? Yes, but there are kind of three kinds of data sets the maturity for them, like to get them open. One, the most hardest issue probably is with the data that is sustaining itself from selling the data. And this is, I guess, also what Georg this morning mentioned. It's a political decision to grant funding to make this data available. And this is our I would say that this is our like for us all the challenge to convince the decision makers that the data has to be funded and has to be made freely available. We have to have all hands on deck to have pressure these decision makers from businesses and society, and also from the government institutions themselves, to make them aware what is the benefits and what is the potential of open data. So next is the few observations and simple points maybe to the institutions that are just getting out there to publishing the data. As Martin today from Register of Enterprises said while receiving the award, that you should ask yourself why not to do it, why not to publish the data and make it open. And I'm sure a lot of colleagues can find a lot of answers for this question. Of course, there are concerns about the privacy and the security. And what we would do in the case when we start is probably when we have to climb a mountain, we don't start climbing it on the steeper side if we don't have any experience. So maybe just for any institution that wants to publish something that does not touch upon the issues of privacy. And if you decide that you want to publish data that could have some fields to it of private data nature, just make it anonymous, and just to be secure, check with our institutions that are responsible for data protection, like Data State Inspectorate. Then there's an issue of standardization? Is it better to wait and to build a very good format and standard and interface, or just make any data available that, and give it away? Of course, the data quality is very important. And this is the goal, to go for machine-readable format in open, machine-readable data in open format, and to have all the metadata correctly described. But this should not be an obstacle just to publish data at all. If you have, for example, your data in Word document or Excel table, which is your working tool, you can publish that data, and don't try to be smart or save it to CSV or XML formats from the Excel. It will just create more confusion. And the closer to the source data you can get, the better, of course. For example, our e-government and our public service departments, we are publishing our research results in Excel format. Because we don't have any, how to say, fancy systems yet, but it's better to publish that than not to publish any data at all. And the last idea is about the involvement of users. One point I would like to make is that data is used, the interesting data. For example, I can give you the idea that there are a lot of applications that have the transport timetables. And this data is actually scraped from the home pages of the public transport company. And if the data is incorrect, the user would think that the public transport company is guilty, and they are the ones that have to blame. In this case, users are aware what is the source of the data. So why not make this data available in the homepage of the public transport company in machine-readable format if it is used anyway, and you will get blamed for it if it's incorrect anyway. Why not this builder of the application could not use that data that is more technically available for reuse? Another point, of course, that also the colleagues made, it's from the conclusions of every successful open data story that involving more users will improve data quality. And you should give the users tools and maybe just some simple form or email to report the data quality. There has to be a sense that users' conclusions about data are heard. Otherwise, yeah, you should read about this in your email or system, not on Twitter, that your data is wrong. And the third point for the institution, if you make the data open, you are reducing the administrative burden for yourself that institutions have while responding to every request for the data. That means that freedom of information law is also permitting in Latvia that if you have the data online, you don't have to specifically prepare it and give it to the people that are asking. You just point them to your website to see the data, and thus reducing your workload on your employees. These are the points that I wanted to make. Thank you very much, and thanks for Latvia for organizing this conference.
Thank you, Toms. Okay, this may sound a little loud. I will turn that a little bit down. It's too loud. Is it better? Okay, right. Any questions regarding the vision of Latvia for terms of EU presidency regarding open data and initiatives, including, I think, the best one, digital by default, for the legislation? I think it sounds good. It sounds, it's actually better than it sounds, don't you think? Why nobody took care of that before this?
Well, I guess that it has been taken care of for a lot of times already, and we are constantly, like we, the e-government policy planners, are always involving in these reconciliations of legislative acts to make this option of making it the process also digitally available. And I guess this is more like a slogan that for the presidency to stress on this point, to make it more of a like a target to reach.
And now I have a little tougher one. Now, open data, it's considered to be the new gold. You can make some money out of it and boom the economy and get it going, etc., etc. And Georg Hietmeier, are you present here? Yes, good one. I will have a question for you as well. Now listen very carefully. Georg showed us in one slide where we have to dig through the layers of rock to dig for that gold. And I understand the metaphysics of this kind of rock, but is it still a national matter, or is it still the matter common for the whole EU? And I will give you an example. The gold, copper and gas is a natural resource of that particular country, a property of that particular country and of its people. Now what about data? We see it as what? So how can the whole EU benefit from a national resource? I know it's a strange and crazy one, but we are talking about EU, propelling EU, the money for the whole EU, booming our economy, etc. But it's still a matter of national resource, a data of some governmental or other structure from any EU member state.
But usually that is the data which has been paid for by the citizens and created
Of that country,
of that country and the whole EU. Yeah. And that's probably why it has a bit of different characteristics like oil, because it was just there and it's owned by some landowner or country, but the data wouldn't be there if there were no people to pay for that and to create all that. And there I see that if you wanted to make this available for all the EU and to make money out of it, yeah, it should be open, it should be for free, and to let the market to do this drilling in this whole bunch of pile of rocks to make something good of it.
Okay, and I will now allow myself to pass this question also to Georg, because he was one of the first one to discover this bonanza in today's slides. So Georg, can you elaborate on data being the national resource, but the whole EU could benefit from it?
I think you have to read the directive a little bit. What's the cross-national solutions are the thing the European Union aims, and it's the whole EU market that should gain competitiveness against its competitors, against the US. And it can't be Austria. You have to open up, and you have to see the whole union as an area, as an economic area that competes with other areas. And that's why the union acted like this, and that's why they also had the legal right to come out with this directive.
There are
Well, Austria is obliged to comply to the directive, to implement it, and then, well. Yeah. So, yeah, that's where we have to go. We need the data from the whole union to build solutions that can compete with other ones. That's why Google isn't based in Europe.
Georg, warm applause to Georg. I was being provocative, but you held like a rock. Good. Okay. Toms, would you like to elaborate on how do we succeed in current presidential initiatives in those three things? Because this is what we already saw and went already in December and November when we already saw that it's coming, etc. Huge preparement work was done. Now we are in the mid of February, and the presidential term is just 6 months. So after 6 months, we would see that it is in some way completed or in some way pushed forward, accomplished for 10, 20, 100%, etc. Where do we are now in the middle of the February?
Well, there are many precise initiatives and papers that have the terms to be approved and have to be approved by Council. And I would not go into details because they are too technical, but those are the ones that are the targets that are set also in the presidency program to approve, for example, that roaming directive and many more of a kind of a little subjects that have to be done. And also one of where this whole digital theme comes together at the end of July is the Digital Assembly in Riga, where the whole of EU decision makers will be and will discuss upon these whole subjects of this digital priority.
Yeah, but the legislation is going on and finding its way in the corridors. So one thing is that we talk about it and press and stress these issues, etc. But it is making its own way, and eventually it will be signed, accomplished, and issued.
Yeah.
Okay. Good one. Good one. Any more questions for the Toms? No. Okay. Thank you, Toms, very much. I will give you this. Local Latvian present as well. I'm sure you have maybe some of these things already in your ownership since you are local, but maybe not in this color. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, a warm applause. Yanis, do you come from the audience 14? Is it still going on, or it's finished, it's complete? Right, okay. Then I think we have to wrap up. Today was a quite tough day, and I see something like 85% of you guys still being here. Yeah, it became a little depopulated, but some of you held like a rock and listened to it until the very end of the sessions. And I must admit, a couple of the presentations today were really exciting, and some of them were very simple, and some of them were quite technical. Yes, but I always find that it is very important to get a new grasp on, I would say, ever-changing landscape of the legislation issues regarding open data, because I remember quite well the last year when I was at the same conference, at the same building, same time, same place here, and we were discussing a little bit different things, and 1 year just have passed and we have moved forward quite a lot, I must say. and the hackathons are going on in many countries, and the legislation is pushed forward, and some people are even calculating the money it will make to the EU economy. I still don't understand how do we do that and how do they calculate, but probably they are doing the right thing, because eventually the businesses and the money it generates will propel this thing and will create demand for more of this. Okay, enough of me talking. I would like to welcome on the stage once again Jan Strays, and he has also a couple of words to say, and probably thank these people for holding on. Yeah, okay. I want to see smiles in the fall.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So you are the strongest people, because just the strongest people can survive such a conference till the end. And I wouldn't like to talk much. I think it was interesting day, very beautiful day, a lot of new and relevant information. And I hope I see you next year in LATA conference as well. And thank you again for your patience, and everybody is invited in side room for a glass of wine. Thank you very much.